Hello and welcome to the Bamboo Chalupa Digital Marketing Podcast. My name is Brett Snyder. I am the president of Knucklepuck, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Nate Shiver, the author of shiverweb.com.
Hello.
So today, Nate and I are going to try out a slightly different format to the podcast, modeled off one of our favorite sports broadcasting TV shows, and that's Pardon the Interruption. For anybody who's not familiar with the program, Pardon the Interruption is Tony Kornheiser and Michael Wilbon that talk through kind of sports topics and news of the day with a short time frame, a timer that it sets for each one of the topics, and they have to get all of their thoughts, comments, opinions in before that timer goes to zero. At which point, they move on to the very next topic, and we go from there. So what Nate and I have done is Nate and I have pulled together 6 different topics. We're going to set a 5-minute timer for each one of these topics, and we are going to share kind of our quick-hitting thoughts, opinions, perspectives on each one of these topics, all as they relate to the world of SEO. At the end of 5 minutes, you will hear this sound, at which point we will wrap up whatever thought we happen to be in the middle of and move on to our next topic. That said, we're going to go ahead and get started talking about one of the more underrated news topics as it relates to the mega giant in the world of SEO, and that is Google's new restructuring and their corporate organization under the name Alphabet.
Yeah, and on August 10th, Larry Page sent out a press release announcing that the corporation known as Google would be restructured to be a subsidiary under the holding company called Alphabet. And the thought process is that right now Google is made up of, it has self-driving cars, it has Android, it has search, it has all these different businesses. And investors were getting frustrated that, Google is throwing money at self-driving cars and not breaking out, results on Google, the internet search business. And so they're going to break it out into this giant conglomerate. And even though it sounds like a boring corporate restructuring, we wanted to talk about, does this matter? What are the pros? What are the cons? Brett.
And so what it actually means here is that Google as a search engine, the Google product as we traditionally refer to it as, is now going to be an individual product line under the organization. And now that's really exciting for SEOs and for people in the marketing space, because now it's showing that this is not going to be something that's going to be grouped in with all of the other Alphabet products. So now there's going to be a very specific focus on the profitability of things like your AdWords campaigns and how ads are actually contributing to Google's share of Alphabet's overall revenues. It's going to allow for some more agile product lines. These verticals are going to be allowed to operate more independently. There's going to be more accountability in terms of what individual verticals contribute to the overall corporate structure. And so now we can start to look at things like self-driving cars, for example, as Nate referred to, where if self-driving cars are getting a significant portion of the budget but contributing no overall revenue, how is that affecting the way that Google, or now Alphabet, is going to invest in the growth of YouTube, if they're going to invest in how they want to move into potential acquisitions in the social media space? This is going to give us a much more clear understanding of the successes and failures of an individual vertical, and it's much more easily attributable to how Alphabet as an overall brand is able to accomplish the goals of that organization.
And that's all great, and I agree with most of that, but I think it's going to end up being a major con. Just because the whole conglomerate and corporate restructuring is usually a leading indicator of Google and the core business becoming a dinosaur. In fact, I would submit that there is even more evidence that's come out just this week in the fact that Google rolled out a new logo across all their properties. Google Search,
which I hate, by the way. I hate the new logo.
Yeah, I hate it too. But also Google Search, they have a new CEO. Larry Page is not in charge of, or not directly in charge of, what controls Google Search. Google as a company has a new role in this bigger conglomerate, and so they're going to be fighting over, investment revenues, and all this. When you add it up together, is a sign that Google is now a fully mature feature of the American corporate landscape and is now going to start acting like most other corporate dinosaurs. I can think of Microsoft, once Bill Gates left and they're kind of trundling along doing their big corporate thing. They make lots of money, but how long has it been since they really changed or revolutionized the landscape? I think that a lot of SEOs we're going to start seeing a lot more corporatization of teams. I think you see that in the Webspam team, which we'll touch on here in another separate topic. And I think that the bottom line is going to start driving a lot more direction for Google, especially when it comes to AdWords and monetizing the SERPs.
And so, but I think that the thing to remember here is that AdWords has been the sole, really the sole driver of monetizing these servers from the very beginning. You can talk about YouTube ads and the different various ad platforms that kind of pull in here, but Google has always been the flagship program. I think what's interesting about this is that they're almost trying to allow Google as that flagship to operate more independently from some of these other, from your YouTube, from, your Blogspot or your other different kind of platforms. There are other different business verticals here. I think what's really interesting about this is it's going to hold the search engine more independently accountable. And I think in the long run, that is going to benefit the user. It's going to benefit investors because now you have a much clearer understanding of how people are actually investing.
Right. And so I think what day-to-day SEOs can take away is look to see where Alphabet is investing, look to see where the direction of Google is. Also, Alphabet is going to buy Twitter. Called it.
You had to get that one in there before we left. So we also want to talk about some of these issues with how Bing has started to evolve into what we're now calling the world of SSL, this HTTPS secure search that Google initiated with the advent of not provided and the 100% secure sites. But anybody who is real diligent about looking at their analytics will have noticed that recently Bing referral traffic is starting to spike. Now, this Bing referral traffic is organic. Anything that's coming in from Bing is really, it's either organic or it's paid. It shouldn't be a referral traffic from an organic search engine. But it's exposing some weaknesses in the ability for Google Analytics to process these Bing results, and also maybe exposing some weaknesses in Bing's ability to evolve into this SSL world that we live in.
Yeah, I think there's two separate issues, but obviously they're related in how we end up seeing our traffic and analytics. One is, will Bing ever get it together? I mean, this is like so many issues in search. It seems like Bing is more than one step behind the cutting edge. They're like 12 steps behind. And being able to provide this data within secure search is something that Google is able to overcome. And as a company as big as Bing should be able to provide the data as well. However,
Bing is reactive. It's entirely reactive from the very beginning. And I think that's what you're talking about here with, talking about this, Bing being 12 steps behind. Is now Bing is not the first people to move towards SSL. They watched Google and they wanted to see how that shook out. And then they finally agreed to do that 18 months, 24 months after Google did.
True. But, and no matter where Bing is, people are still using Bing. And I think that goes into the separate issue is in Google Analytics and how much responsibility Google has in making sure that the data is tracked correctly, whether or not Bing is providing the information when they send that user over. And I think this ties into the whole thing with referral spam. And, if Google is going to provide this product, Google Analytics product, that they provide it for free because it increases Google's profitability, I think that they need to continue to invest in it further to make sure that it's accurate regardless of, where the traffic is coming from.
And so what's interesting about that is, I've actually seen kind of some of this weird Bing referral traffic in the past, even before we started to go to some of these larger tracking issues. Talking about things we're coming in from bing.com/CR, bing.com, even webmaster referral traffic, from webmaster tools. Conspiracy theory warning, but we've talked before about this idea of triggering the herd, how Google will make a change because they want to trigger behavior in the general population. Now, it begs the question on whether or not they recognize these weaknesses in the way Bing is able to process SSL, and by pushing everybody towards secure search, people will remember that Bing, this is not just a tracking issue. Bing has had issues with their ability to actually process HTTPS results. I had a personal client that went through, migrated their entire site over to HTTPS. Previously, we're averaging not an overwhelming amount of traffic, probably, 15,000 visits a month from Bing. down to 600 visits a month after they move to HTTPS. It makes you wonder whether or not Google is trying to trigger the herd towards this SSL to be able to kind of solidify their own market share, because they understand that it's a weakness in Bing's ability to process that, and then almost backfires on them, showing that it's Google Analytics' inability to process it when Bing reacts.
Yeah, and I think it's not just for the market share. I think it would be a big PR win, because I mean, if Google is the one who can keep moving forward with providing better security, which I think ever since Edward Snowden is kind of in the air that security is a good thing. And if they can position Bing as, the competitor who isn't keeping up and reposition Google as the good guy in the security conversation, I think that's a big PR win for them as well.
I think it's interesting when you talk about kind of this idea of security issues, because even some of the more advanced SEOs and marketers don't necessarily understand the impact of this SSL in terms of a user experience. But privacy has become such a hot button topic. It's been something that people are just interested in. Oh, you can provide me with deeper encryption? Oh man, I don't know what encryption is, but I want deeper encryption. I don't want my data to be, to be sacrificed or to be put in a position where it can be compromised. I think Google understands that they are in a position where they can actually go through and trigger the herd, so that they know that Bing has a weakness, they're going to expose that weakness, and in doing so, they're able to solidify themselves as really the strong leader in search.
All right, the next topic we're going to cover is referral spam, and there's a couple of updates. One, we did basically an entire episode on referral spam and being able to trust your analytics. Not going beyond referral spam and also looking at how Bing traffic is referred, and a lot of the other deeper issues with analytics. But over the course of the summer, Google announced at a conference saying that they would try to tackle this issue on a global level, that they would roll out a solution. That solution has yet to come out. It was supposed to, Google was supposed to get better at it in August, but that never really happened. I'm still seeing tons of referral spam in my accounts.
I am as well, but I am starting to see it tail off a little bit. And just to kind of give a little bit more background here, when we're talking about referral spam, one of the most, one of the first ones that kind of came through was SEMalt. We talked about that. Deradar was a big one. 7makemoneyonline.com. Free social share buttons, a couple of these refer sources that really are just bot traffic that is pinging people's analytics profiles to try to mine the web for additional information about user activity. Now, when we talk about referral spam, when we talk about the issues that we have here, it went beyond simply referrals. Now we're starting to see direct traffic that's being attributed. You see a massive spikes, 300, 400% spikes in direct traffic. But you look at it and it's 100% new visits, 100% bounce rate, 1 page per visit, and 0 minutes, 0 seconds time on site. It's really getting to the point where it's starting to compromise the integrity of these results, and it's affecting the people who are most ill-equipped to actually handle it. It's not affecting your large multinational companies. It's affecting your medium and small businesses, the people who don't have dedicated web analytics, or in a lot of ways don't even have a dedicated web resource. The problem here is that, we're starting to have this referral traffic that is able to compromise the integrity of all of your results. It's not even that you can say, all right, well, it's this one referral source. If we exclude it, we're fine. We have advanced segments set up that are excluding 25 different referral sources. We have, through Nate's recommendation, and we'll link to his post in the the show notes here, where we have to set up hostname filters to make sure that we can capture that direct traffic. It's becoming advanced level shit that people have to do to maintain the integrity of their results. And the problem here is that once you start to compromise the integrity of those results, every decision that you would have otherwise made based on that information becomes suspect.
Yeah, and it's gotten to the point where I think the main issue is this just how life is? Is this just the role of the webmaster? Is this the role of, what it means to have a website online, is that you just have to put up with this spam? Kind of like, email. I mean, everyone has email spam, but you just you put up with it. Occasionally, it causes a minor nuisance, but
But it causes a minor nuisance because most email providers have addressed the major issues. They now have spam filters to address the major nuisance.
Yeah, and that's something Google. they rolled out the bot filtering, a bot filter that didn't really do anything earlier this
Didn't
year.
do anything at all. It's not that it didn't really do anything. It didn't do anything at all. It didn't block the ones that they knew were these marquee kind of, top of mind, referral sources.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that, I mean, I think it's diversify the sources of the spam, but early on it was largely one guy in Russia. His name was
Vitaly.
Yeah, Vitaly, and it was one guy who was spamming an entire analytics platform that giant sites run on Google Analytics, and he's running a global spam operation out of his house in Russia. And it's just mind-boggling that Google didn't have any protections against this and that they're letting it just kind of trundle along.
I think that's what's most concerning to me is that Google did not appear to, and this is a known issue. It's something that they understood. They know this issue. They'd even put out these bot filters or try to note these additional referral sources to exclude them. They knew this was an issue, but they allowed it to get to the point where, if I were a small business owner that was seeing that what ultimately became, I ran it today, I was talking to some folks on my team here, 80% of the traffic in the month of May, which is when this really kind of hit its peak, at least for some of our clients, 80% of the traffic was spam. Now, if I'm a small business owner that doesn't understand the web, how am I supposed to address that? How am I supposed to use the web and my analytics to make data-driven decisions?
You can. Either that or you have to become better educated. I think that's the only silver lining, is that a lot more clients are becoming more educated about what it means to have a digital presence. You have to go beyond simply having a website and knowing how many people show up. That analytics is a bigger package.
So let's stay along the same vein here when we're talking about web spam, but let's get away from Google Analytics. Let's get away from the Bing referral and other referral spam. Let's talk about Google's web spam team.
And Google's web spam team, it used to be basically Matt Cutts for years and years, for more than 15 years. Matt Cutts was the face of the Google web spam team. He was the liaison between Google search and the SEO community. He traveled constantly all over the world. He was berated. He was the scapegoat for SEOs everywhere. But he's now been gone. He's been on sabbatical for over a year now. And most people expect that, he will, transition out, retire from the team. And he's largely been taken over, by a team including Gary Iles, John Mueller, Malia Oye, and several others.
And we talk about this where John Mueller and Miley are not, they're not new faces. These are still people that, people who have been in SEO for a while are very familiar with them. But they never had that same authority. They never had that kind of same renown that Matt Cutts had. Even with Gary coming in, where, my issue with this is that Matt Cutts is, at the end of the day, he was an engineer. He was somebody, he wrote the first safe search algorithm, the one that made results family friendly. He had a very intimate understanding of the way that the search engine algorithm works, and the way that, not only that it works in practice, and the way that it works, in the ideal, the way that what they were striving for. Gary Iles is a webmaster tools trends analyst. He's a face, more so than he's somebody that I think had any real impact in terms of the growth of that. He's somebody that you had to give the SEO industry somebody that they can point to, somebody that can kind of be that lever that they can kind of stay in between the actual engineers that are creating the algorithm and the SEOs and the business owners that are affected by it. And so on a personal level, let's just say on a personal level, good for Matt. It's something where he did this for years and years. If anybody's kind of read his story and familiar with his story, he told his wife when he started that he would do this for about 4 or 5 years and then he would step back from the role. And he did it for 3 times that. He, and as Nate kind of mentioned, where anytime something goes wrong, Matt Cutts was personally blamed for Google Panda. He was personally blamed for Google Penguin. When a business or a website was hit from one of these algorithm updates, they didn't blame their black hat tactics. They didn't blame their shady SEO. They blamed Matt Cutts. So on a professional level, I give him a lot of credit for being able to take a step back and being able to do what's best for him and for his family. But on a professional level, frankly, guys, we're getting screwed. We don't have an opportunity. We don't have any sort of outlet that we can trust that we're getting kind of communications from the search engine in terms of why things are being done the way that they are. Even things we're getting some clarity on some of these algorithm updates, the types of spam that it's looking to combat. The collateral damage when sites are being kind of pulled in with collateral damage from some of these algorithm updates. There is no outlet or no avenue for people to seek more information. We are now almost living even further into the black box, and having, Gary, who I have not met the man, I don't know him personally, but his background does not instill, at least for me, a lot of confidence that he's able to help address any of these issues. And I think that the way this kind of sums it up, it's kind of indicative of the way that Google's moving, where they're trying to add these more features, but we're getting less clarity on them. We now have Google Alphabet, as we talked about, that is this big conglomerate corporate structuring that includes Google as an individual product line. You got more items that are included in Alphabet, but less clarity in terms of the accountability of Google as a search engine and the algorithm itself.
Which, I mean, I think that there might be more to the story that we're not really hearing. I mean, you mentioned that, Matt was an engineer who actually talked to the engineers who wrote the algorithm. And now we have Gary Isles, who he's an analyst. I think that we might have reached the point, or we've gone beyond the point where engineers no longer know the algorithm. I mean, there are obviously engineers working on the Google algorithm, but for the most part, I don't think there is any one person who actually knows what is going on with Google and how Google serves up the search results that they do. I think it's interesting if you really watch some of the videos that John Mueller does. He tries to be really helpful, and in many ways he is, but all of his answers are very, very vague and heavily nuanced and couched in a lot of possibilities and potentials. And I don't think that's because he doesn't know. I think it might just be because nobody knows. I mean, that we're beyond the era of having, a search team working on the algorithm where everyone understands what's going on. And so I think that it might just be part of the new world that we're working in, not just SEOs, but the Webspam team as a whole.
And it begs the question also, is there more, not only that, but is there more that they're just not telling us? Do they know more about some of the deficiencies in the team or the way that the team is kind of losing its talent? That's what scares me. All right, so let's get away from web spam entirely. We went from Bing, which, into our, Bing referral spam, web spam. Now let's get away from the kind of this word association. And let's talk about something that's actually been a pretty exciting conversation among the SEO world, but really kind of in the corners of it, not something that's really at the forefront. But there has long been kind of this assumption that Google wants to use some sort of usability or engagement factors in terms of ranking. Lately, we're starting to see kind of more advanced conversations regarding whether or not click-through rate is something that is going to start to impact organic rankings in search.
Yeah, and so what spurred this conversation was on Search Engine Land back in August 2015, there was an SEO, his name was Bartosz Gorliowicz, who shared the results of an experiment that he conducted that it basically suggested that click-through rate was not a ranking factor. He used his personal site. It's a fairly well-structured test. It was a little bit too focused on his personal website for my liking, and on some pretty popular terms. But overall, he had some pretty solid data that showed that click-through rate was not a ranking factor. But then a few weeks later, there was another study that came out on Search Engine Land that was also well structured. It used a legacy term related to the 2002 Winter Olympics that proved that that click-through rankings could be a ranking factor, that it was the only factor that the authors could track that moved their site up in the search results for a target term. And like Brett said, this topic has had a long history. AJ Cohn has written an article about it. And Google over the summer specifically said that it is not a ranking factor, but they do use click-through rate for evaluation and experimentation. So the issue is, one, does this really matter? And then number two, is this just another case of semantics where we're kind of missing the forest for the trees? Or
is this a situation of correlation and causation? Are we now talking about this kind of swirly mix of things that actually impact user activity but don't have a causal impact on our rankings themselves? And Nate, you may remember this as well. I think it was 1 or 2 MozCons ago where Rand kind of got up there and almost tried to do a live test of this, where he asked for people to go and click on a specific result and see if they could move the needle on that particular ranking.
Oh, yeah.
And it actually did. Again, anecdotal evidence. It's not really a well-structured test in that sense, but it begs the question on what they're using, whether it's for click-through rate on different results, whether it's talking about bounce rate. There have been studies that have gone out. Does Google track the amount of time between your Google searches? So if you say, I go and I search for something, I click on a site, but I'm back in Google 4 seconds later, pretty indicative that the actual user experience was suboptimal. Does this really matter? Is this something that we can optimize for, and is it something that we should optimize for? Now, you talk about click-through rate for users. You talk about things like your meta description, which is not a ranking factor, but can influence click-through rate. You talk about, what would you change? How does this change any of the process? And I think that's something that a lot of SEOs kind of get away from. They lose that core focus where, to me, even if click-through rate is a ranking factor, what does that change? The only thing that I can think of is, does that mean that it's better to go and pay somebody to click through to your site? That's the only thing that it potentially begs the question on here, because if not, it's still all about creating the appropriate signals to serve that user experience. That's at the end of the day what we are trying to accomplish here. And so if we're looking at, even if it's for, as Google says they use it for evaluation and experimentation, or if it's something that actually has a causal impact in the algorithm, does this impact the way that you want to approach your SEO strategy? And I would argue that it does not.
Yeah, I mean, the traditional ways of influencing click-through rate, writing a better meta description, writing an engaging title, both of those are going to stay the same. But I think the one direction where I took this, and just to kind of parse Google's words and to read things in where I shouldn't be reading in, is the idea of click-through rate as intent. If Google is using click-through rate, they might not be using it to judge, whether or not something is a better result or not. They might be using it to judge what are people looking for when they use this query. In other words, what are the types of content that people are looking for when they're using a broader query.
And I think the other thing to kind of consider here is there's different types of user intent. I know for me, I'll go to a search result, I'll open 7 or 8 different windows before I even go and look and read any of that content because I want to cover my basis. It's very difficult to pin down exactly what it is that users are doing. And to that sense, it's very difficult to try to tie back click-through rate to an actual ranking factor.
All right, well, let's for our last topic, let's go in a slightly different direction related to SEO, but more along the lines of our friends in the PPC world. And that is the continued rise of ad blocking. So ad blocking, while it's still small, it's used by most people say about 144 million people. There's been a lot of chatter over the summer about, the growth in things like Ghostery and AdBlock Plus and some of the other extensions. And then also notably the fact that Apple will be rolling out ad blocking ability for Safari on mobile devices. And so even though this is sort of a small contained internet phenomenon, it's rapidly growing. It's growing at 70% per year, and it's rising and really big among target demographics that have a lot of money. And so even though it's still opt-in, this is becoming a really big deal where companies like Google and Bing, the ad associations are really having to figure out how to grapple with this issue where what happens when people simply aren't seeing your ads anywhere, which funds basically the entire internet, which basically funds Google.
And let's put this into perspective a little bit more here before everybody starts going and saying, I got to pull out my advertising dollars. 144 million people that are using ad blocking. Now, again, even if we say that's less than 2.5% of the world population, talk about the number of people who are actually on the internet, but all that, but it's still 144 million people in the grand scheme of internet usage is really not all that much. And I think the big thing to Nate kind of touched on here is where it's mostly these bleeding edge people where, my mother is not going to install an ad blocker. My mother does not even know how to install Google Chrome. It's something where there's different demographics in terms of who's going to be impacted here. And I think that's what Nate's talking about with these, big money demographics. We're talking about more of these people who are, the verticals that rely on these early adopters are the ones that are going to start to consider whether or not their advertising dollars are as strong as they used to be, if they're going the same distance. It's always a cat and mouse game with ads. Consumers always try to find a way to not have to see ads, and then advertisers always try to find a way to be able to provide those ads to them anyway. There's a lot of cool case studies where people are saying, all right, so people who are now slowing down, I forget which car company it is, but there's a car company that actually puts its ads in slow motion now so that people who are fast forwarding through their DVR still see what appears to be a consistent visual progression of the commercial because it's being seen in fast forward. Now you talk about people who have strategically timed text on their ads. The people who do the skip forward button that skips forward for something like 30 seconds at a time. They're now trying to time that so that it will skip forward and still show flashes of text that highlight their ad. It's always cat and mouse, and it's something that, as we're looking at the way that advertising and the distance that advertising is able to go at this point, there's a really important, Nate, I'm going to let you kind of get into this, but there's a really, really important conclusion to draw from this with the way that things like Firefox and Safari and Apple are trying to allow people to block ads. And that has to do with the importance of our organic search.
No, I mean, to me, it's a pretty straightforward conclusion, because if people don't like ads, if people are actively trying to block ads, what are they trying to block ads to get to? They're trying to get to the content that they're looking for. In Google, they're trying to find the organic results. If they're on a website, they're trying to find the content that they landed on the website to find. And so I think the buried lead here, while everyone is talking about, how do we get our ads above the fold? How do we keep our ads from being blocking? Well, to me, the biggest conclusion is that organic visibility is more essential than ever. Ranking in the organic results in Google is more essential than ever. Getting that PR pickup on a news website is more important than ever, because that is what people are actively seeking out. The whole game of advertising is, interrupting people on their search for the content. But if you can master the art of being in the content, being in the thing that people are looking for, I think it's more essential than ever. And it's something that SEOs and PR people, they can watch the advertising people, wring their hands over this trend, but I think they can really sit back and relish the opportunity that we have.
Well, I think the other thing that you got to remember is that ad blocking is based on an algorithm as well. It's based on the fact that this algorithm needs to be able to identify what is defined as an ad. And in doing so, it's really important for those, for consumers or people who want to run advertising to recognize the fact that there are ways to manipulate that. In context ads, finding ways to pay for things that don't show up in your Google Ad Services URLs or your retargeting URLs. Being aware of how ad blockers work is going to give you the tools that you need if you want to continue to invest in that advertising platform.
All right. Well, you can find previous episodes, links to things that we mentioned, and our contact information at bamboochalupa.com, where you can also go to let us know any feedback that you had on this episode format. But if you don't want to miss another episode, you can go subscribe to the podcast in iTunes or your favorite podcast app, and leave a comment and rating while you're there. We learn a ton from your feedback, and your ratings also helps others to discover the show. So for Brett Snyder, I'm Nate Shiver. Thank you for listening.